Pastor Mike, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Manx Radio. Here we are, Monday, 29th of January, the last Monday in January 2024. Halfway through the Canon administration. We're heading around all the constituencies, just talking to the two MHKs representing each constituency. What have we learnt so far? What do we know? What's going to happen in the future? Well, Douglas East MHKs. Clare Barber was elected for a second term in 2021 and Joney Faragher for her first in September 2021. So, Pastor Mike, good afternoon. Welcome to you both.
Pastor Mike, Andy.
Pastor Mike, Andy.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So, Joney Faragher, I mean, first time as an MHK. If you'd known then what you know now, would you still have done it?
What a question to open with. Yes, I would have, because I think that the politics that I bring are kind of what the island needs. However, I think if I could go back to the start of the term and put into my head what I have in my head now, I think that would be really helpful for me.
Interesting, because many people say they'd like to become MHKs. How long did it take you to get up to speed? Did anybody mentor you, or did you just pick it up as you went along?
Well, there is the expectation that you will pick it up as you go along. And I think, for me, I've fed back that I think it would have been helpful to have more of a sort of mentor system. Or I have to say, by the way, the Clerk's Office do provide CPD continuously, as well as provide a sort of intro week with lots of really, really good and relevant training sessions on there. But I think I felt that more help in the department, for example, or around how the departments work and contacts, etc., would have been really useful in the first instance to cut out a lot of work and make it a bit more efficient.
Okay, and second time around for Clare Barber, and again, what does the second term bring? What does experience, know-how?
I think, as Joney said, it's that ability to know, I suppose, who to go to when something goes wrong, or you've got a query, you've got something you want to find out. If you don't know the right relevant person, you can often feel you're going around the houses just instead of the person you're trying to represent or trying to solve something for. So being able to know exactly where to go is definitely a bonus. And I think, there will always be some change internally within departments, but as a general rule, if you know the roles, you can find the right people. So I had that as a benefit, absolutely. But I still go to the CPD sessions. I think anyone who thinks they don't still have things to learn is probably missing something as they go along. As much as I'd like to share information, if I can, that I've managed to garner, equally, I absolutely am always learning from others. And I think in this role, there'll always be someone who's come across something that you're now going through. And you can often share advice and experience without sharing any information. So, we've always got to be conscious we're not sharing personal details, but actually if you just understand the scenarios, often there's someone who's been there and trodden those paths before that can really unlock the doors a bit quicker for you.
Interesting you mentioned, and data protection is something that's come in certainly in the past 10 years or so. How difficult is it to tiptoe around data protection?
I think it is hard, and I think one of the biggest frustrations is there is an expectation when people email us that automatically we can then take that information and just get the solutions with the information, whereas actually we have to seek their permission if it's not explicitly given to be able to then go and share that in other directions. Otherwise, I'll try and do it anonymously, but there's a limit to how far you can get if all you're sharing is a principle of a situation as opposed to the specifics and that person's information that they can then go and dig in to see what's happened.
And equally, of course, a department will need explicit consent in order to share information about that person. So I regularly get queries with regards to, say, for example, social security, and they would like me to liaise on their behalf, but I need their explicit consent, or the Social Security Division, rightfully, of course, can't release the information about that person or explain rationale behind decisions without that written consent.
What's the constituency workload like, Joney?
It's up and down, but it's fairly constant. And in terms of how many hours you'd have to put in, I tend to put aside at least a day per week. I try to make it a Friday when I do constituency visits or deal with constituency emails. I think you could spend all day, every day doing, and it's the same with a lot of the roles in this particular job. You could they are endless. They really do kind of keep opening up the more you do. So yeah, it's a good workload.
Without compromising anybody's data, typically what sort of stuff will you get queries about?
Oh, it's so wide-ranging. It could be, I mean, yeah, without sharing any personal details at the moment, I'm dealing with housing issues. So that's trying to liaise with private landlords and in fact, I won't go into any more detail, but that kind of issue comes up quite a lot. Often social housing is a big issue that people will contact MHKs about. Access to benefits, so availability of information on that. And of course, parking and issues around parking kind of sit in several different categories themselves. So that is such a big one that we deal with.
What sort of parking? What sort of problems?
So, for example, first of all, the pressures of parking, so the fact that there aren't enough spaces for the amount of cars that there are in our constituency. But secondly, the boundaries of disc zones is quite a big issue that repeatedly crops up. So Clare and I have liaised about this, and we know that both of us receive fairly similar and constant correspondence about this, that the natural boundaries of the disc zone tend to lie a little bit further out, and we have asked the DOI to undertake a review of that so that they could actually establish where the disc zone boundary might lie more naturally and more in alignment with people's needs.
It's fair to say that Douglas East has got its fair share of apartments, Clare Barber. So you must get an indication of what the rental market's like at the moment. How is it standing, and what about people's ability to pay and to make their way nowadays?
So, I mean, there's unquestionably challenges around housing, and I think that's across the island. And as you say, Douglas East has a lot of... Well, it actually has a really broad range of properties. We've got everything from the, £4 million luxury homes to some of the lowest sort of one-room rentals that you would find on the island. It's a really broad mix. Yeah, absolutely. And they come in all sorts of standards, I think it would be reasonable to say. So certainly I know that over the years I've been representing Douglas East, supported a number of people who've had challenges with their property, whether that be supporting them through environmental health, whether that be supporting them with accessing funds towards heating, for example. There really is a broad spectrum, and also supporting them in knowing what their rights are, because in some cases people will be evicted, but actually when you look at the letter of the law, they have significantly more rights than they might be aware of, and some of it is simply about that awareness, making sure they know who they can go to get on boots on the ground support, because it's also knowing where the limits of what we can and can't do are, and that's tricky because sometimes there are people who desperately need support, and they've reached out, they've made that initial cry for help, and they just don't have the energy to go to the person they actually need to go to, and so trying to bring those pieces together can sometimes take a lot of time, because it's really important that people actually are able to access the things that they're entitled to. But housing is unquestionably a challenge. I certainly am hearing of people who are finding that the end of their tenancy's coming up. It's not going to be renewed, and of course finding somewhere at the bottom end of the market to the mid-range at the minute is nigh on impossible. Well,
I've had a couple of messages about this. Michaela asked a similar question to that, but also this is WhatsApp 608 saying, can you ask Clare and Joney what's happening to help young families find a home? The rental markets is impossible if you have a child and pets. What's happened as regards providing affordable housing? So many sites that we have, the prison, Park Road School. Why isn't the government building some houses? Joney?
Well, it's a great question, and thank you to the person who sent that in. So I'd just like to sort of talk maybe briefly about the Poverty Committee's most recent report, which has only just been put on the Register of Business, and it's a report on housing. So it's got 32 recommendations in there that hopefully the Council of Ministers are yet to submit their response, of course, and that will be debated in the April Tynwald. But those 32 recommendations are aimed at the type of people that Michaela has asked about there. So it's obviously the Poverty Committee, so it's aimed at people on lower incomes, but it's equally looking at the issue as a whole and trying to actually address what the root causes are of what people identified as the housing crisis in the 2021 general election campaigns.
We have listeners to Mannin Line all over the world. The podcast is listened to here, there and everywhere. And many people, particularly people listening live across now, will be saying Poverty Committee on the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man is full of enigmatic millionaires who are trying to figure out which bottle of Chablis to have for lunch.
That it were. I mean, I think we all know that there are pockets of deprivation across the island, just as there are absolutely everywhere.
There is an underclass, isn't there? I mean, there are people who are hemmed in through circumstance in poverty.
Absolutely. And I think in almost every constituency, there is a fairly large social housing estate of people who are obviously on low incomes and who are potentially vulnerable for other reasons as well. And those people matter as much as everybody else in our society. And I think that's why we've come up with the Poverty Committee in the first instance, which was in the last administration, and why Tynwald voted not only to keep the Poverty Committee in this administration, but to actually expand its membership up to 5 people. So it has 5 members now instead of just the 3, showing how Tynwald's commitment, I think, to actually getting a more inclusive and equitable island.
What's going to happen? What's going to be done about poverty, Joney?
Well, so first, let's just talk about the report, because the first recommendation in the report, which I think is really important, actually tasks the Council of Ministers to produce an action plan to implement the recommendations of the previous Poverty Committee's reports. Now, I just kind of want to lay a marker down now that action plan will be scrutinised very robustly. We don't bring recommendations in order for any minister to say this has already been undertaken, we will maintain the status quo and we think that answers the recommendation. That's not what we're bringing recommendations for. We're bringing recommendations to actually affect tangible change. So that is the marker that I would lay down right here for that recommendation. Council of Ministers have been asked to produce an action plan to implement the recommendations of previous Poverty Committee reports, which should mean that we see tangible action to actually address inequality and poverty on the island.
OK, and Clare, Barber, let's just come back to the prison, to Park Road. People will see those brownfield sites sitting there. Absolutely nothing happened for years and years and years. And if there is a housing shortage, why doesn't somebody somewhere, whether it's the private sector or the public sector enabling the private sector, why can't something be done? Why can't we get more houses and apartments built?
So some of it's around the way that government disposes of land, and I think it's incredibly frustrating often, actually. So we know that those sites have been, I suppose for want of a better word, relinquished. They're not currently in use. Then what happens is other departments have the opportunity to say whether they think they're sites they need for things that they want to put in place. So whether that be education, looking at school provision, whether that be the Department of Home Affairs looking at the Blue Light Hub concept and feasibility studies. And until they're confident that they're not going to use them, they won't then release them for something else to happen. Now, I understand why that needs to happen. I think we would also be just as criticised if we were to sell those sites off or develop them and then suddenly find we didn't have something for another project that we need. But I think there is something around us trying to speed that process up so that those sites don't sit for the length of time that they are at the minute. And we know that there's both public sites in Douglas East and also a huge number of private sites that are sitting as undeveloped brownfield sites. And obviously there is the Island Infrastructure Scheme that's looking to try and nurture some progress in that regard. But all of those things take time, and as much as we can put incentives in place, it's not for government to do everything. I think the Manx Development Corporation work has been really positive actually in regard to what they're doing with the old nurses' home, and obviously there's the work around Westmoreland Village, and that's a live planning application. Which I won't be hearing the appeal for, so I'm slightly more comfortable talking about that one. But there is absolutely a need to put accommodation in. Now that is looking at the affordable market for accommodation. I think that's the right area we should be looking. But the compromise position, and that will be obviously for planning to determine, is that there is a challenge then around parking, and we know that that's been one of the biggest pushbacks for the people in the area. Although we acknowledge pretty much everything you would need is walking distance from that site, the reality is we anticipate some people will have cars. That is an unavoidable fact, I suppose. And we see that across Douglas East, where we've had old townhouses converted to 3 flats or maybe 5 rooms, whatever it might be. And then you end up with 3-5 vehicles where maybe historically you'd have had 1. And then the knock on is they're just, as Joney said, there is not enough parking. So you've got to try and look at all of that in the round, try and put in infrastructure that perhaps allows electric bikes to be charged, things that might allow people to make conscious choices away from cars, But I think we always have to acknowledge there will be vehicles, and that is unavoidable.
Okay, we're with Douglas East MHKs today, Joney, Faragher and Clare Barber. Stephen, you're live with the Douglas East MHKs.
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Douglas East MHKs, and good afternoon, listeners.
Good afternoon.
What I would like to ask, thank you for that greeting. What I'd like to ask is, it was interesting to see that there was a result from the South MHKs working as a team and getting a result for their area over the school and the swimming pool. Now, what I'd like to ask is, I'm sure you will both be aware that there is overcrowding problems, repair and maintenance problems in schools in Douglas area. And should Douglas MHKs act more as a unit together to seek improvements and benefits for the schools? Because I know that I believe that some of our schools, certainly close to your area, are very overcrowded. There's porta cabins for classrooms. There's maintenance that is sadly lacking. Maurice Road, I believe, needs assistance. The last time I was in St Ninians for the hustings, the last election, there was obviously remedial work needed in the main hall there, and it appears that maintenance is missing. I know you spoke just a few moments ago about Park Road, and Park Road is earmarked for a new school to solve some of this overcrowding. So my question is, should you work more collaboratively with your fellow Douglas MHKs to seek some of these solutions? Because I know that schooling is probably not as exciting as some other issues, but it's vital for the future.
Okay, Joney, Faragher.
Yes, thanks for your question. I absolutely agree how vital it is as well. I fully agree with that. I take your point that we should work more collaboratively and actually, do accept that. But I just would like to sort of maybe update you. I've got a couple of questions in for Keys next week actually on this exact issue and school overcrowding and more just looking at what sites have been identified. I had a written question in about the Park Road site about this time last year, which said that there would be further updates and that the Department of Education was still actively working with stakeholders to identify a site. So I'm obviously seeking an update on that and looking at where we are up to with identifying a site for a two-form entry school, with reference to the fact that, as you've said, there is overcrowding issues in the schools, and I do receive emails about that. I do take your point though that the collaborative working that the Southern MHKs undertook recently was super effective.
Clare Barber.
Yeah, hi Stephen, good afternoon. I would agree with Joney. I should declare an interest. I've got children in Douglas schools, and my oldest has just gone to Ballacameen, and there's no question, that there's a huge number of children within the school. And I know he came home with ideas for projects of things we could fundraise for the school because there's maintenance that does need doing, and they're aware of it. So I think there's always a concerted push around making sure that the maintenance budgets are in the right place, making sure they're being used. But I suppose one of the other challenge we have is we don't necessarily see the bigger picture across all of the school estates to be able to make that prioritisation decision. So it's absolutely incumbent on us to work not just even with Douglas MHKs, because actually the boundaries of schools don't actually always match those clearly defined constituency areas. It's actually wider than that. But I absolutely take your point. I think we can always work better with other colleagues.
Stephen?
Well, I think we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. I do hope you can work more collaboratively. I do think that's the way forward. And sadly, it's a fact that political pressure is brought by the number of votes that you can bring to bear. And sadly, sometimes you've got to accept that you're elected to fight for what's best, A, for your area, and B, for the island nationally.
Okay, all right, Stephen, I appreciate that. Thanks very much indeed. Excuse me, on that subject, Clare Barber, you are a member of Comin. Does anything ever cut across your responsibility to constituents from what happens in your ministerial portfolio?
Yeah, so it does. And I mean, the way the government code set out allows us to act on behalf of our constituents, which is absolutely the right thing. You know, for me, I don't think you could possibly take a ministerial position if you weren't able to stand up and fight for your constituents, even when sometimes that might be not the direction that Council of Ministers chooses to go. So there will always be things that I think cut across, whether it be DEFA and constituency areas, which I'll ask Michelle and delegate to her for, or whether it be Council of Ministers. I think we'll all come across that. I mean, the size of the island, I think, dictates that will be the case. So for me, it's about making sure that there's clear processes in place that allow us to do what we are put there for, which is both to represent our constituents, but also to make sure we're representing the best interests of the Isle of Man.
Okay, a note in from Tim just saying, regarding schools, we're being told that there are going to be another 15,000 people coming to the Isle of Man. They will include a substantial amount of children. If we have, and you mentioned, I mean, Ballacomine is a fine school, but it's got porta cabins and there's nowhere to park there. So is that going to be a good advert for getting new residents to the Isle of Man? And if the schools aren't fit for purpose, surely we can't wait until the pupils arrive before sorting out the school estate.
And I know from talking with Julie Edge that that's absolutely something education are already alert to. Not just the projected influx that you may have of children, but also recognising that percentage of those children may have additional educational needs and making sure we can provide for that. So I know that they're doing some work looking at where capacity sits and trying to do that, that work that manages that disconnect, because there are spaces in some schools, and obviously there are other schools, certainly some of the ones within Douglas, that are oversubscribed, but not necessarily does the person's location, they can find a place to live, which of course is often the case, rather than where they might want to live. It's often where they can find somewhere, match up with where a school space might be available. So there is definitely work ongoing in education in that regard, and I think it's going to be a big piece of work. Okay,
Julian, you're live with Joney Faragher and Clare Barber.
Hi, Andy, and hello, Clare and Joney.
Hi, Julian.
Hi, Julian.
Hiya. I've got one question for Clare, but I'd like to say a quick thank you to Joney for supporting the continued operation of the Southern Swimming Pool. And there are literally thousands of people who think you and your fellow MHKs did the right thing and are not at all disappointed in you. You can be sure of that.
Thanks for that, Julian.
And talking of collaboration, it may not just be just with government people as well, because I was also very impressed with 5-year-old Maisie and her mum Chloe, who were featured on page 7 of last week's Manx Independent newspaper under the heading "Maisie Helps to Secure Pool's Future." I would have thought Maisie's school teachers and friends must be very proud of her as well.
Indeed.
My question for Clare is on food security. The noticeable empty food shelves in shops across the island in recent months begs the question, do you have any plans to reintroduce food production on the island, even something like as simple as chicken production, and perhaps maybe making legislation less burdensome on farmers?
So it's not something that we've looked at in terms of, I suppose, government compelling something like that to happen. There is some degree of poultry farming. Obviously, we know that because we have egg production, and equally there are some people doing turkeys around Christmas time. But large-scale poultry production, to my understanding, and I don't purport to be a chicken farmer, is hugely challenging because of the economies of scale. So it's not something that I think has been looked at for some time. I did speak to someone recently, actually, a farmer who had a brief foray into it, and said it just wasn't something that was viable on the Isle of Man. Now, whether that's changed, I don't know. And I do think globally we're seeing a shift in how food production and food is valued. But at the minute we're in that interim process where I think for something like poultry, and maybe it's not the best example, I don't know, Julian, but the costs are exceptionally high, and I'm not sure whether the people purchasing it would bear those costs, and therefore whether that could be a viable business. And I think the challenge for government is how much does government provide in terms of a support system, I suppose? Do you go on a per chicken basis? Because we have gone down that route with some other things, and I think perhaps we get ourselves into a bit of a pickle, maybe, I think I would say. In terms, though, of our support, our focus is absolutely on increasing local production. But I think I would be looking at some of the areas where we already have established production to increase that, rather than potentially introducing new areas. And there are some things that we simply are unlikely to be able to grow at scale on the Isle of Man. And we're always competing with costs. So when you can grow something miles away and then ship it here cheaper, then we could grow it ourselves.
Do you think
it's challenging?
Do you think inviting one of the world's biggest supermarkets to have a virtual monopoly on the Isle of Man is going to increase local production?
I mean, I'm not sure they were invited. I don't know if that's the word I'd use, Andrew. I think you're being a bit mischievous, but I think the challenge is that there was ShopRite was for sale, and there was someone who came in and purchased it. I'm not aware that there was a queue of other people looking to purchase ShopRite, and that is ultimately a commercial decision. What's absolutely right for us to do now, which is what the officers and the team in DEFRA are doing, is meeting regularly with Tesco's. Tesco's are absolutely saying the right things. They want to support local, but equally Tesco's is a large scale operation, and they want to make sure they have to have stuff on the shelves at a continued standard, at a continued supply and continued quantities every week. Now, for some of our local producers, that's something that's challenging for them, because that's not how they've historically worked. So when you're a one-man band potentially running a business, you need to have some time off. And if you can't manage your stock to be able to do that, those are the bridges we're trying to overcome. We've obviously put a support scheme out to make sure that people can get the relevant accreditations so they can supply to Tesco should they choose to, and should that be right for their business. But I think there has to be a point where we say what is and isn't the role of government, and that is tricky. But I absolutely support us increasing food production, and I think as we see Scope 3 emissions being considered more and more by companies, that transport will start to have a cost that's attributed to it. So bringing bananas from Brazil will suddenly not just be the cost of putting them on a boat, it will be the cost of covering off the emissions for those, for example.
Has the department had ongoing discussions with Tesco?
Yeah, so officers meet.
Do you find them easy to talk to?
Yeah, I mean, I've chatted myself with the both the Lake Road store manager and the island manager for Tesco's, and I found them to be really open. Okay. Had some great conversations, and absolutely, they want to get our products on the shelves. We've now got to make sure that works for them. Okay.
Well, I'm glad you have, because we've been trying to get in touch with Tesco's media office since they announced that they bought ShopRite, and they haven't replied to one of our phone calls or emails. So it'd be nice if Tesco did. Julian.
Yeah. You said something interesting about transport, because it seems to me that the legislation in place is trying to lower emissions, yet we are shipping food here. I mean, even if it's not even food, I mean, the idea that we're shipping stuff from, say, Guangzhou in China to Southampton, for example, is an 11,000-mile journey using Panamax ships that use up 15,000 litres of marine diesel an hour. So you can imagine how much that is. Aren't we kind of displacing our emissions elsewhere? Would it not be, I mean, just from the pure point of view of just growing our own food so it doesn't have to be trucked all across Europe and all the rest of it, surely that would make more sense. And also, the new boat obviously is having some issues at the moment. And also, when it goes into Liverpool, I was going to ask you this as well. What's going to happen? Because they can't do freight. So is the Arrow going to be leased elsewhere, in which case the Ben will have to be used to bring freight from Heysham each overnight sailing? How's that going to work?
Okay, let's just go to Joney first and then to Clare Barber.
So obviously this is more of a sort of DEFRA question, but in terms of what Julian mentioned there about emissions of transporting food to such an extensive distance, I completely agree. However, I think what we need to bear in mind is, as Claire mentioned there, that it's the cost, it's the financial cost versus the emissions cost, I think, that we're trying to weigh up here. And that's, if it's cheaper financially, people will buy it, even if you put a product next to a local product and one is cheaper and one is local. they are going to get the tube.
That's human nature.
And I think it's difficult to try to get across to people the importance of supporting your local farmers, particularly when people are experiencing financial issues themselves now. So.
Clare, Barber?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think it is the balance, and that's why, in my opinion, I think what we really need to encourage is those people who can afford to buy local, to shop local, acknowledging that for some people that isn't something that's an option for them. And I think that we need to look at where we can increase production that will help with some economies of scale. But I'm not sure that we're ever going to get to a position where we're doing the level and scale of farming that we're sometimes trying to compete with. But certainly my family, we are in a very fortunate position. We are able to buy some of those local products, and I absolutely I'm happy to support those local farmers, and I think it's right for me to do that. But I've also been in times in my life where that just wasn't something I could do. So I think we all have to acknowledge that it's not for me to tell people they must shop local regardless. We have to make local much more accessible and affordable where we can. But actually, there are plenty of people, as Julian says, who can afford it on the Isle of Man. And I would absolutely encourage those people to make sure we do support local, because that allows our farmers to invest perhaps in more equipment, to look at different products they might go into producing. And we know that there's a great sort of shelves full. If you go into some of our stores on the Isle of Man, and you can see, whether it be from a vegetable shop at the side of the road, we've got some brilliant places where you can go and buy local vegetables, local meat, local eggs, and all other products. I don't want to exclude anyone, but absolutely, it's the right thing we should be doing, is increasing local production. But I think we also have to be realistic about how far potentially we can go in that regard.
Okay, thanks, Julian.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Good to hear from you. A note in from Audrey, who just said, will milling wheat ever be sown again on the Isle of Man, bearing in mind the position at Laxey Glen Mills and no Ramsey Bakery?
So there are contracts in place at the minute. There is milling wheat growing on the Isle of Man. There are some people who are still in the position where they can export, and there is some that's being taken into Laxey Glen Mills. Obviously, we've seen the recent news where Robinsons have bought Ross Bakery, and actually Robinsons are clearly putting a huge investment in around bakery provision on the Isle of Man. I think that's a really exciting story. So I absolutely think we will see more milling wheat grown, because I think there is a demand for it. So again, keep buying bread if you can, keep buying the Laxey flour. I think, again, great product, and we should be really selling that as a good news story.
Live today with the Douglas East MHKs between now and 1. Call, text, email and WhatsApp.
Located in Upper Douglas, Woodburn House offers an elegant, one-of-a-kind space to host your unforgettable event. Celebrate your love story and say I do to Woodburn House. Our 2024 wedding diary is now open, and our wedding planner is here to take care of every element of your perfect day and make your dream wedding a reality. Woodburn House. Visit woodburnhouse.im or call 888 300. That's 888 300.
Drive smarter, drive more reliable, drive a great deal at Mannin Motors. With a superb range of cars for every budget, always available. And if we don't have it, we'll source it. Plus, servicing, valeting and prestige detailing too. Mannin Motors, Richmond Hill, Douglas. Find us on Facebook or call 420 420. That's 420 420. Drive a better bargain at Mannin Motors.
When it comes to money, rainy days happen to us all. If you'd like to save for a rainy day, choose your local Manx Credit Union, where your savings stay in the local economy and go towards helping families and island residents on their own rainy days. Visit Manx Credit Union Peel Road and find our newly extended opening hours online at mcu.im. Save with the Manx Credit Union. Every bit of savings really does make a difference. Manx Credit Union is licensed by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority.
Plum Master, where plumbers shop. For supplies, we've got the lot. Ramsey, Douglas, come on down. Plum Master, the best around. Gas boilers, pipes and taps. Bathroom fittings, stylish rads. Plum Master have all in store and deliver to your door.
For trade and DIY plumbing supplies, visit Plum Master at Haldane Fisher in Douglas and Ramsey. Plum Master, your local, reliable, competitive plumbing supplier.
This Tuesday at 6 o'clock here on Manx Radio, join Kiri Kermode and Simon Clark for Countryside.
We hear from a couple more people that I caught up with at the plough match over in Faragher last week.
I talked to Central Mart's auctioneer and farmer Peter Quayle about his acceptance of the role of captain of the parish of Maloo. And also I caught up with Tamsin Colmode from Little Meadow Farm in Derby, who were one of the newbies at the Ramsey Farmers Market.
That's all in Countryside Tuesday here on Manx Radio at 6 o'clock. And don't forget, you can download and subscribe to the podcast for free at manxradio.com.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
And Joney, Faragher and Clare, Barber, MHKs elected for Douglas East. And James with us. Hi, James.
Hello, and hello, Clare and Joney.
Hi, James.
Hi, James.
I wanted to raise 2 points with you, and I'll be as quick as I can. Now our minimum wage is lower than the UK minimum wage, and it's not good enough when you consider the cost of living here is higher. And I think it's a bit disappointing that the Minimum Wage Committee can't make a decision and make a recommendation to government. It's not on because people are struggling here. And which leads me to the second point. There is a housing shortage on the Isle of Man, and everybody talks about, let's have so many private sector houses and all the rest of it. But the problem we've got is there is a shortage of local authority housing or council housing here, which should be not-for-profit housing for the vulnerable. And so that leads me to say this. There are a lot of young people on this island who are going to end up in jobs where they will never, ever be able to afford to buy their own home. And they will be thrown basically to some of the unscrupulous landlords we've got on the Isle of Man. What's your views?
Okay, hi James, thanks for the questions. So in terms of the minimum wage, I do absolutely agree with you that we need to get that minimum wage set. We're not actually behind the UK in terms of the fact that their minimum wage is simply set before ours for the next financial year. We haven't set ours for the next financial year, so ours isn't lower at the moment. It just isn't set, and it won't. I'm fairly confident it won't be lower. Manx Labour Party position remains that the minimum wage and the living wage should be aligned this year. And our member in Treasury has released statements on this recently, and as has the Manx Labour Party, and that is our firm view. And I would personally urge the Treasury Minister and the DFE Minister to make a decision without the input of the Minimum Wage Committee if they can't actually get their recommendation in place in time.
Yes, I mean, the Minimum Wage Committee, I think, have said they want to go out and get some research about the impact on businesses. And I can understand where they're coming from. But, I mean, I would agree that, for me, the minimum wage should be at a point where it's a living wage. If we're acknowledging that's what you need to live, then that seems to make sense that would be the minimum. And I have supported throughout the alignment of that and the need to move the minimum wage up until we get to a point where we only have a living wage. But as Joney said, it's not that we're behind, it's that process that now needs to take place. I'm not sure what happens. I assume the Minimum Wage Committee have to make a recommendation, and I would expect that to be coming, I would hope, soon. But obviously the piece of work that they've requested happens now. I don't know how long they would envisage that might take.
Public sector housing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, public sector housing is part of that whole housing picture. The private sector housing that we're seeing being developed is having to be done at a price that they are getting the returns that they want for their business. And we're seeing houses go up that are exceptionally expensive, and as you say, realistically for many people will never be affordable. So we do need additional public sector housing as well. And that's where some of the projects that we're seeing Manx Development Corporation work on actually are looking at making sure we have that allocation that's freed up to the public sector portfolio. And I know that one of the other pieces of work that the Housing Communities Committee are looking at again is making sure that we're bringing properties that are already there back into use, because I think as much as we can build new properties, we know that the construction costs have gone up. We know that availability of labour in the construction sector has become an issue. So I think there is a benefit where we can to making sure that we're keeping all the housing stock that we already have in good use.
And what about dilapidated private properties? Properties that look like the Addams family live inside them, And we all know where they are. We see them day to day, and nothing seems to get done about them.
And those are the ones, I suppose, some of the ones I'm talking about. You know, there are either ones where people lock up and leave and the houses just sit empty, or there are the ones that, you know, are absolutely dilapidated in the conventional sense of the word. And not only are those houses then not being used, but they're also causing damage to people in neighbouring properties. And that's certainly something I've had a number of times in Douglas East that's incredibly frustrating to someone who is investing in their property when, because someone else's roof or guttering is damaged, it's causing water ingress to their property that's totally outside of their control.
So what can government do about it, or what can Douglas Council do about it, surely?
Could I just raise the issue, just respond to this in terms of the poverty report, because it does have recommendations that are relevant to this issue. So first of all, that the recommendation 2 in there, that the Council of Ministers commits to the number of public sector houses to be built each year from here into 2041. But equally that... Sorry, I'm just trying to read the recommendation here in order to get it correct. But yeah, so that's I'll just leave it at that we do have recommendations in there to address this issue in terms of the fact that we should have a plan actually as to how many new homes we need, both in terms of the private sector and public sector homes, and we haven't, and that's really crucial. So I think in terms of James's question, actually getting that figure from the Council of Ministers in a plan.
And people will be saying, Joney Faragher, you know, there are recommendations, there are what politicians would like to happen. But when's a brick going to be laid?
Absolutely, that's the question. And it's down to the Poverty Committee members, it's down to all the backbenchers to actually have effective scrutiny around that and to be able to ensure that they hold the government to account. That's why we've included our recommendation that Council of Ministers actually draw up a plan to implement the recommendations of the previous Poverty Committee, which haven't been implemented, and that is why we've included that. And we need to be effectively holding the government to account for the resolutions that have been passed by Tynwald.
James?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to make another point, if I may. It certainly hasn't helped Tim Krukall increasing the council house rents by 7.5%, which is above the present rate of inflation. Now, I know those on Social Security will have their rents paid for them, but once again, those people that are earning just a bit too much to claim benefits, but not enough to call themselves well paid, they're going to be hit again. And 7.5%, to be honest with you, I think is draconian. And despite what Tim Krukall told Tynwald, said it was fair, that man has no idea what fairness is, because he doesn't have to live on the sort of wages or pensions that we have to.
Okay, all right, we appreciate that. James, thanks for calling today. I just want to also put this to you, Clare Barber and Joney Faragher. When we say that young people have no chance, and it's very easily said, but we hear it, have no chance of ever owning a home, surely that's going to breed frustration, possibly despair, possibly even resentment from young Manx kids who may just pack up and leave. And would anybody blame them? Clare Barber?
And I think unquestionably it has become harder and harder for people to get the initial deposit together. Actually, is hard. You know, I hear frequently the position people find themselves in is that the mortgage would actually be cheaper than the rent they're paying, and because they're paying a higher rent, they're not in a position to be able to save to get an actual mortgage because they haven't got a deposit. So I think the banks are demanding higher deposits. I think that's become a significant block for people. I think there's a number of things that have come together, both the increase in prices of properties, the increase in rental levels that are being charged, the increase then in the gas and the electricity that you would be paying against it, the fact that wages I think it's a perfect storm. I think we really are seeing, and I don't think it's just here. So I think, you know, it's not just the Isle of Man that's experiencing this. There are pockets where it's easier, but there are still significant number of places I'm aware of, certainly across the United Kingdom, where they're experiencing a similar situation.
Okay. Joney Faragher, anything government can do about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, there definitely is an issue of intergenerational fairness that's been raised, I think, multiple times when I was on the doorstep canvassing over the election campaign. And I do, to a degree, agree with Clare there that it's an issue that's actually experienced across the piece, really. It's not just an Isle of Man specific issue. I think we need to ensure that our young people's voices are heard, and I think that's kind of maybe the missing link here, that a lot of our policies are framed around older generations because that is the generation of turn up to the polls, and it's really, really important that we motivate young people to get to the polls in the next general election, and I cannot emphasise that strongly enough. We need to hear their voices, we need to get them engaged in politics so that we can create the future that they need.
OK, live with Clare Barber and Joney Faragher on Mannin Line.
Find a hidden gem in the Isle of Man, the Abbey Restaurant Ballasalla. This old country house offers a relaxed and sophisticated atmosphere where you can wind down with unique and interesting fresh food and drinks, from dinner with fine wines to tea and exquisite cakes. Enjoy our fantastic lunch menu with fresh specials, or join us for afternoon tea and dinner. To book, click theabbey.im, find the Abbey on Facebook, or call 822 393.
When you save a little money, it means a lot these days.
If you're looking for bathrooms and tiles, you'll always find something new in store at Pacesetter. For surprisingly affordable prices and excellent choice, search online for Pacesetter Douglas. Or better still, visit the Pacesetter Bathroom and Tile Showroom on Harris Terrace and see the new styles in store.
You can get the best of everything, where the price is twice as nice.
Oh! Problems with your spine and posture can have a serious effect on your quality of life, but a Line for Life spine clinic could help. If you're suffering from back pain, neck pain, headaches, their holistic scientific approach could find and treat the root cause of the problem for long-lasting relief. Touch A Line for Life now, or call 629 444. A Line for Life, the island's spine and posture clinic, here to make life better.
You'll find a real home away from home behind the big wall on Grovemount South in Ramsey. Grovemount Residential Home promotes independent living, where residents can come and go as they wish in our homely environment. Our professional service includes respite, long-term residential living and other care options. Call in for a cup of tea and a chat. We're opposite the Ramsey Group practice, or call 812 173. Isle of Man registered charity number 108. Grovemount Residential Home. Professionalism, dignity, care.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
After Mannin Line today, we're in our 60th anniversary year, of course, and John Moss is going to be looking back in 2004, the revelation that the MEA had taken out unauthorised loans. That's after Mannin Line today with Joney Faragher and Clare Barber and the youth committee you were telling me about, Clare Barber.
Yeah, so one of the new concepts that's been brought in through Tynwald is a Tynwald Youth Committee, so ages 15 to 24, and they've members have been chosen on that. They are going to sit. They will be exactly as any other Tynwald committee. They'll be able to take evidence from ministers, take evidence from the people who are at the head of that field, and the topic they've picked is housing. So I think absolutely, as Joney said, it's really important we hear the youth voice, and I think we're going to have a really good opportunity through that committee, and then they will report and Tynwald will debate that. So there's a really great avenue. So I would imagine they would be submitting a call for evidence. So I would encourage anyone with thoughts on this topic, whether they be young people who are in that situation, whether they be parents of young people who have concerns, wait till that call for evidence comes, and I'm sure we'll both publicise that when it does and get the submissions in.
OK, thanks for being with us today. I got through about 10% of the questions, as always. But thanks to Joney Faragher and Clare Barber. Will you come back again later on this year?
We will do, Andy. We'll maybe get through the rest of the questions, or some of them.
Back with another Open Line tomorrow on Manx Radio. And on Wednesday, Rob Cowell, Ramsey Commissioner Rob Cowell, Deputy Chair of Ramsey Commissioners, lead member for Finance, General Purposes and Establishment on Wednesday. And on Thursday, another Ramsey Commissioner, but this time in her position as leader of the Green Party, Lamara Crane, is on Thursday. But back with an Open Line tomorrow. Thanks to Chris Quirk on the phones today. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.
W